All right, maybe we can start and start slowly so that people can come in
Yeah, I think we're
one
good to go.
one by one. So a couple of weeks ago, I read a book by Christopher Lawrence called War by Numbers. After having read a book by Dupuis, Trevor Dupuis is read a lot in French war schools and academy, and so I just sent him a message saying, I think this is a really useful book that you wrote, and then Mr. Lawrence suggested I come to this event, so it all went very, very fast. This presentation is going to it's basically an adaptation of what I'm teaching in Paris, in a Paris university. I'm going to explain this now, and I've tried to adapt this to your context. So about who I am, right now I lead a European think tank, a European defense think tank called OPEWI. I lecture also at Paris Dauphine University. I'm a reserve officer in the French Armed Forces, and I was an EU and NATO political advisor, diplomat, basically, in Kosovo, Afghanistan, GCC, Libya, and Brussels. And I am an historian by training. Two quick parts for this presentation. You can interrupt me anytime you like, by the way. We'll talk first about the macro trends and the debate, growth or decline. And then I will tell you about my course. I was in Ukraine recently, like many people, and we go with OPY once every 2 months, basically. And you see their innovation, but you also see regression. You see a lot of tech tools in situ structures, but you also see trenches, World War I trenches. When you talk to special forces, you see that new tools that were not present in Afghanistan 10 years ago when I was there with American forces. But they also tell you, these guys, that when they start an operation, they have no contact with any headquarters. They are completely in the blind with maps and pencils, basically, and trying to reach the target because, they cannot be located by the Russians. They try not to be located by the Russians. And this is what I will try to discuss also today. I think there was a conversation in the US, very inspiring conversation at the Chicago University between Robert Gordon and Joel Mokyr. And my understanding of politics and of ideology is that it really comes most of the time from our own personality, the way that we see life and the way that we experience things. And so I usually try to put this conversation into two boxes, into two teams. Because it's very difficult right now to say if our century is a century of decline or a century of growth. You have people, interesting people, smart people on both ends of that conversation. So on the positive, optimistic side, you have Joel Mokyr, which is basically saying that things are going fine, thanks to AI, to machine learning, to robots, to coding, and that we have nothing to be worried about. We can still go on vacation and enjoy culture and life, and nothing really bad is going on. That leads, I think, this team to think that wars will remain what they have been in the last 2 centuries, extremely organized, massive when they come, and predictable in some ways. And then you have the other team, which is the Gordon that I call the Golden Lana Del Rey team. I like Lana Del Rey quite a lot. I also like Taylor Swift, by the way, but Lana Del Rey is also someone that I respect. This team is telling you something else. It's telling you that actually we are having no more real growth anymore. When you integrate climate change, when you integrate oil and gas spiking, the price of oil and gas spiking, and that leads them to think that actually when you look at real wages, for example, and also per capita data, you realize that actually people over the past 20 years are becoming poorer. In the UK, for example, we'll see that in one or two slides. The average British pay has gone down by 10% since Lehman Brothers. And so for them, usually they tell you that wars are going to be chaotic. They're going to be bottom up, chaotic, and unpredictable. I think the problem we have in this defense conversation, and I'm going to be a bit blunt here, and I hope that you won't see any disrespect to your country. I love America. Myself, I have served with US troops. I have been to many parts of your land, to Colorado, San Francisco, Virginia, Florida. I spent 2 months as a boy in Florida in the 90s. But I believe that the problem you have, that many Americans have here, is that they side with Taylor Swift in this a bit too much. And I think for three reasons. The first one is America's mentality. You value economics over social sciences. I've seen that a couple of weeks ago. I was debating the future of NATO, and when I mentioned America's demographics to an American high-level American think tanker, he said, "Oh, demographics doesn't count. What matters is trade and business. Business between the US and Europe is still strong." And he refused to actually integrate any other parameters. Your financing, the financing of history, anthropology, philosophy, is going down in the US much faster than in Europe. Your country is a recent one. You were born in 1776, and so it's very difficult to bring you to having an interest in eras, centuries from before. Or usually what you say, there are no data. We don't have enough data before the 18th century, so it's not worth investigating. Obviously, there are exceptions to that rule, but you hear that a lot in the US. The sponsoring also of this research, of these studies, I think is a problem, because obviously companies want to finance studies which in the end produce some sort of a positive glow or positive vibes. We have less of that in Europe because state is basically financing most of our research. In terms of your economy, you are different from the rest of us, from the rest of the world, basically, because of one thing which dominates everything, which is shale oil and gas. You are blessed. You have been blessed over the last 10 years with this. This is, we believe in France, why you were able to pull yourself out of the 2008 financial crisis. This is number one reason, because you have cheap. Again, you managed to have cheap oil and gas. We do not have cheap oil and gas in Europe anymore. Everything is expensive here now. That allows you to have a 2% economic growth, which is very, very rare in developed countries at the moment. Everybody else is at 0% or in minus right now. You still print the dollar, you fix the rates, and you have a younger population by a couple of years than Europe. And then finally, your geography. You are an island with no direct enemy. Climate change is not impacting you as much as in the Mediterranean. But I think you're impacted by it quite a lot, especially these days. You have amazing mineral deposits, and you have one of the highest soil fertility in the world. And so in the end, I think all of this is separating you from Europe, and to some extent, it is separating you from the rest of the world. And I think it's a problem for foreign policy thinking more and more. I will try to explain why now. What we see in Europe is, and why we are in such trouble, first with economics and then with military affairs, is one, because of the decline of oil and gas reserves, especially oil reserves. This is data from the Shift project backed by International Energy Agency data, which shows that we have not found basically any major significant oil reserves over the past 30, 40 years. And so reserves are going down, and this is obviously pushing prices up. Many countries, most of the countries, I mean, you can't really see them because the graph is too small, but almost all of major oil-producing countries have reported discreetly. Some have not reported this because this is taboo and it leads you to prison and being killed, Saudi Arabia and Russia, for example. But many, many countries are saying that their conventional oil has peaked, that they're not finding any more of it. And so it's going down. Shell oil is coming to the rescue in the US, but it's more expensive. And so some, many in Europe actually are predicting that the barrel might average $100 in 10, 15 years. That would mean 3 euros, 4 euros per liter at the station. For the military, this is huge because, as many of you know, our equipments are heavy. They are armored, and so and also the C2 headquarters consume a lot of energy, a lot of electricity. When I talk to industries in Europe, especially, they tell me that they do not plan electric batteries, hydrogen, solar panels, to integrate all of that into military products before 2040, 2050. It's just not in the cards. Because in the military, you need confidence, and you only have confidence right now with oil. The second major factor, of course, is climate change, which is so apparent right now in France and in Europe. It appears that we are going, that the temperatures are going to rise, not by 1 or 2 degrees, but actually by 3, 4, or even 5. We still don't know exactly what will happen in 50 years, 60 years. But what we know is this: we know the impact, which is a decline in land productivity in my country, France, this year. Not talking about 5 years. I'm talking about this year, and I'm from a peasant family myself. The wheat productivity, the wheat has gone down by 10%. This feels like the movie Interstellar, except it's not science fiction. It's happening now. Water scarcity, coastal flooding, mortality rates higher in cities, and of course, new diseases. What does it mean for the military? It means budget constraints, and it also means that we are more and more involved in climate stuff, and that our resources are pooled in that, in a national, internal direction, and not for overseas missions like we did from the 90s to basically 2014. And right now, we don't see in Europe any innovation at scale to get us out of this twin mess. The second thing I would like to say about this is which is an issue and which is affecting military affairs tremendously, is that we have in this economy, in this new 21st century economy, we are actually at parity between the two blocks that are fighting each other, which is basically NATO, Japan, South Korea on one side, and China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea on the other. When you look at manufacturing output, when you take out services, when you take out overpriced attorneys and accountants, and when you really focus on factories, what factories can produce, you realize that the ratio is in our favor, but not by a lot. It's a 1 to 1.3 ratio in favor of the West. We produce 7 trillion dollars basically of manufacturing products, and the other block is now producing 5.5. This is very much different from World War II, where at the beginning of the war, the Allied bloc had a 2.4 advantage to the Germany-Japan bloc, basically. And at the end, and this is why we won to a large extent, we had a 5-1 advantage to against Germany and Japan. We produced 5 tanks, 5 planes, when they could produce only one. Which reminds me of this show that some of you have seen, perhaps The Wire, and I think this is something that all of us have witnessed in Europe and in the US for the last 20, 30 years. This is now having concrete operational impact. And it explains, I think, the parity that you see on the battlefield in Ukraine right now. In terms of trends, so to sum it up, we have energy costs rising, climate cost rising, mineral scarcity, China also rising. That leads to some states now thinking that violence is worth more than cooperation. More and more states realize that actually they can win more by violent attacks than by dialogue. But I think this violence is hampered. It's limited by 4 or 5 factors, basically. So I'm sort of predicting myself that the 21st century is not going to be a high-intensity warfare century. It's going to be more of a mid-intensity boiling warfare century because it's limited by these parameters. The fact that the population is getting old, and we see that in Ukraine. The average age of fighters dying is 45, 50 years old. Also urbanization, which is now covering all of the globe and all the coasts. This is slowing down operations, as we know. The parity also between the two blocks, which is something quite new, honestly. And that is also slowing down, I think. This is going to slow down. This is already slowing down wars. And obviously the fact that budgets, national budgets are constrained by so many other issues. And so wars are probably going to be slow, protracted, and deadly. They're going to be very defensive also in nature. And also the second conclusion that I draw from this is that local operations are going to be more recurrent than international coalitions. When I was at ISAF in Kabul, I remember one of my American colleagues working for General Allen telling me, Michael, what you're seeing right now, ISAF, 50 nations, 150K troops, it's the last time in one generation or in 30 years. And I think it was right. Geography is back, and politicians are thinking more and more regional instead of global, and they also try to control their supply chain increasingly. And so that led me to design this course in Paris, trying to draw military lessons from other stagnating moments, looking at history in the past to see what military leaders have done before us. And the question is, of course, what trade-offs occurred in the past in such moments. I do not believe that our century is more complex or intense than others. It is actually slow and to some extent predictable. This graph had a huge impact on me. It's from the France's Deep History School, the Longue Durée School that maybe some of you know, of Fernand Braudel and Marc Bloch. And this graph, it's in French, but it basically shows you economic growth, from antiquity to now. I mean, not actually now, from antiquity to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the 1700s, that my country, France, missed, unfortunately. And so what you see here is that you have moments of course, of high and moments of lows. And so what I've done myself is look at this, basically. Look at moments of stagnation before the lows, because I believe this is what we are seeing right now. So I'm focusing on the 3rd century, on the 10th century, on the 14th century, on the 17th century, which is absolutely fascinating, and also on our century. As you can see in this graph right now, when you look at GDP per capita in developed countries, but also in developing countries, you see the same sorts of stagnation as these past moments. Sources here for this, a couple of books. Histoire globale, it's a Beaujard book in French, very interesting. Duflo also, always interesting. Good economics for hard times. I think she's a Harvard professor now. And also think this Jake Sullivan remark at Brookings was highly interesting, because it basically admits that that fun times are over. The course tries to avoid modernocentrism and also Eurocentrism. As you can see, we have antiquity, Middle Ages, modernity, contemporary, and we try to have different points of view, you know, forcing students to think from a Washington perspective, but also from a Paris perspective, from a Baghdad perspective, from also a Delhi perspective. And you know, understand also the strategic culture around that. There is less data out of Europe and before the 1500s, that's for sure, but we actually can do more and more. And I think there's enough. Course values, what's more interesting for you, I think, is what you can see on the right, military planning. So I'm using a NATO methodology, what we call IPOE, for those who know about J2, NATO J2 doctrine. I'm mixing this with French deep history analysis, also with military economics, and with algebra. So case 1 is about the Roman Emperor Philip I in the 240s. Extremely interesting. I'm trying to understand what Rome could have done better at this moment. Should it have used a defensive posture, an offensive one, or should it have reallocated the legions? This is a moment when temperatures were falling, rain was not coming also in Egypt, mineral mines were also getting scarce, and the empire was attacked from at least 2 directions. Kyle Harper, the American historian, Kyle Harper is from Princeton, is extremely useful for this. But they are, you know, I can think of other historians also who have done a lot in the recent past to uncover this issue. Second case, the Abbasid emir in right before the end of the 10th century. Baghdad at the time was leading, was even stronger than Europe, was dominating the Mediterranean and even parts of Central Asia. But here again, temperatures were getting cold and low. The empire, the caliphate was losing control of North Africa, of Egypt again. The Byzantines were also getting strong. Weirdly, a lot of attacks from the south, from nomads in the south, but also from the north. And so here again, you know, it's all about trying to make plan a grand strategy around these parameters. Case 3, French center. This time it's a bit more complex. I would say it's the most difficult case because it's about trying to choose a different capital for France. You know, in the 1300s, Paris was not fixed. The king was extremely mobile. During feudality, you know, the aristocracy was very, very mobile. It became more sedentary as of I would say, the 15th century. But before, I mean, kings in Europe, they were traveling around, hunting, and just meeting people and not spending that much time in Paris. So I think something else, a different capital could have been chosen, and this would have changed, of course, France's fate and history. You see the same conversation, for example, in 15th century China. The Chinese left Nanking for Beijing, and they probably failed to catch the capitalist wind because of that, because they chose a continental capital instead of a maritime one. And so they lost the maritime fight to the Brits in Asia in the 16th century, 17th century, because they chose a continental capital, mostly to fight enemies in its north. But it changed China's course basically. And you have the same conversation, for example, in Spain. Just to mention another example, in the 16th century, Spain hesitated between having a capital in Lisbon or Madrid. Eventually, they sided with Madrid, which is very continental, as you know. And that opened the way for the British. If the Spanish had chosen Lisbon, it's quite likely that they would have contested the seas to the British, which they did not. I'm trying to do the same here for Philippe le Bel, for the French, at a moment of extreme scarcity and climate change and economic contraction. Case for this time India, advising the emperor at the end of the 17th century. Very difficult century, a lot of famine, a lot of diseases and death and wars. And here it's about adopting an Indian point of view. What do you do with these new European merchants coming on your shores? What do you do with enemies in the north, with Afghanistan? Do you try to expand in close to Indochina, what us French call Indochina? A very, very interesting case, because I think India was not impacted by climate change as much as China. China was really, really devastated by the 17th century. India was not really, because they actually chose the right policies to fix things and also to reduce economic inequalities. But always interesting to discuss what they have done and to see what could have been their strategic thinking, and could we do better nowadays with the data that we have. And fifth case, this man, Donald Trump, and here it's about trying to understand America's options in Afghanistan 2019, when General McMaster was advising Donald Trump. What could the Americans have actually done better? And here some of my students are already thinking about this case that I think many of you know quite well. That's the end. That's the end of the presentation, which is more of an olive branch, than a something final. It's more about exchanging ideas and showing you some of what is happening here in Europe. And now I'm open to your questions. I don't